or kind of go to work, and that's something you will be doing in your day-to-day work or in your with respect to your day-to-day responsibilities also. So what do we have today? Just a quick overview of what is product design all about. Like, what's the whole fuss about? Some suggestions or key takeaways right up front to kind of provide more context or depth. Then I'm going to go into like some very general guidelines or framework for how to address these questions, right? And of course, online you will find a ton of stuff. So of course, research is highly recommended. But this is something I found useful in my interviews, and this is also something I use as like a guideline or framework when I interview prospective candidates. Then we'll do a sample walkthrough or like a teardown, and then I'll just provide some sample prompts if everybody wants to practice, and then we can do Q&A. We can even do Q&A in between. I'll definitely ask the audience if there's anything that they would like to understand more, or like if there's something that needs more clarification. Okay, any questions before I go ahead? And I'm going to try and make this super concise. It's a pretty minimalistic deck with like a lot of emphasis on like the actual structure of what happens behind the scenes. Any questions? No questions? All good? All good? Okay. All right. So just a quick thing. So product design overview. Again, the whole goal here is to like for you to design, improve, or discuss products. It has different terms across different companies, organizations, product sense, design thinking, improvements, etc. Whatever you want to call it. But the expectation and what you solve remains the same. It's pretty standard. There's three types, right? You either design a product from scratch. That's like a 0 to 1 product ideation to implementation cycle. Then there's improving an existing product, like basically how would you improve a product? Let's say, how would you improve Google Maps, or how would you improve Facebook, kind of questions. Then the third is like a pretty common question as well. What is your favorite product? And this is basically you describing your favorite product and walking them through how you would improve it. Problem solving expectations, and this is again not an exhaustive list, but these are definitely areas on which you will be graded, or where the highest weightage is. That is, of course, understanding your users and their needs, right? What are their pain points? And we'll go into details for all of these things. But it'll also test your design skills and how you create a product vision. How do you align strategy with like solution generation? Are you creative? What is your intuition from a product perspective, right? Like intuition is a very big thing because that tells the interviewer or anybody you interact with, how do you think on your feet? How do you deal with ambiguity? And how do you kind of deal with like all the changes that happen in the market? And of course, summarization, that's like your skill for summarizing everything and like making sure you provide like a concise response. So that's pretty much what product design is about. Some real key takeaways or just guidelines to follow, I think, is it's a case interview. There's no right or wrong answer unless it's specified upfront that you are expected to come to a certain conclusion. So that's a great thing. Then one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen candidates make is not following a structured outline. And when I say a structured outline, it means just using a structure to address the case prompt, but do not try to overfit like specific frameworks. You do not want to come off as a robotic. And of course, successful strategies include, again, good prioritization, good solutions, considering the market, etc. And your approach may differ based on what the question is. And last recommendation, this you'll hear from anybody who comes to this session or anybody you speak with, is practice, 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 because you kind of need to develop that natural inclination to design a product from scratch. So any questions, concerns here real quick before I go into like all the specifics?
Sorry to interrupt. So anyone has questions, just raise your hand, or it applies for people who have joined online as well. So let me know.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I did not get that.
I was saying like for people who have joined online, you can raise hand option, or for people in person as well, also you can raise hand if you have questions.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, all right, so real quick, let's go into like the next slides. A lot of content to cover with the amount of time that we have. Now, this is like super important. This is your guideline or a proposed framework for addressing product design questions. We've discussed what product design is, we've discussed what the expectations are, but what do you actually do when you get a case prompt or when you try to solve a product design question? Again, there is a lot of online material. This is something that I have found useful. This is something that has worked for me, so I can kind of attest to that. And this is like a very customized curation of all the interviews or all the interviews I've conducted over a period of time. The first is clarifying the situation. This is basically you understanding what the whole situation is about, what is the expectation. The second is, of course, super important, clarifying or understanding who the customer is, followed by recognizing their needs, because ultimately you're trying to solve something for the customers. And we'll go into specifics for each of these sections. Prioritizing pain points, brainstorming solutions, and the biggest thing, prioritizing a solution. Of course, in the ideal world, or I mean, in the real world, you cannot build everything for everyone. It just doesn't happen. No matter whatever you try to do, there's no capacity or resource constraints or budget constraints. All of these things do come in the picture. So really prioritizing a solution, using those trade-offs and listing key features, that's a big pitfall, and this is like super important when you try to solve a case as well. And of course, summarization. Uh, so this is pretty much a proposed guideline or framework. This is something I think covers all the bases or categories where you are weighed against in an interview, or in general, even when you actually try to go to your like job and try to solve a complex problem. This is usually the approach everybody follows. And again, it's more of a guideline. Do not try to strictly use this in an interview. You may have to work around some things based on how your conversation is, how the interaction is, and what the expectation is for a particular interview round for a particular situation. Uh, so going into more details, right? Let's discuss each section, and this is where I found key areas that you need to cover in an interview, right? So taking the example of clarifying the situation or getting more context, right? Once you get the prompt or when you're trying to solve a case, you need to ask more questions. And these questions can be as simple as, why are we doing this? Why do we need this? Who needs it? How does it work? Are there any constraints, etc.? About 2 to 4 clarifying questions. The whole intention here is for you to understand more for what is the expectation, because the case prompt is usually just a one line sentence or a 2 line sentence, right? And we'll go through specific examples, but the way you would be asked is, you are a product manager for, let's say, a social media company, design a product for education for that company. Like this is just how much the prompt would be. So you would need to ask more questions to kind of set the context, set the picture, and like be a little more specific when you answer it. And of course, if there's no clarifications, you do need to make assumptions and then proceed. If you do not make assumptions, then again, that's a pitfall. So one important thing to consider is, if no clarifications are provided, do assume something and then check if it is valid, and the interviewer will either say yes or no, and then you can proceed. So this is pretty much setting up your stage for the whole case interview. This is super important because this is actually now what you will use to address all of the other stuff that they expect. Going to next steps, right? Now, this is where you start everything. This is where you identify your end users. If you design a product, service, whatever it is, a process, ultimately it has to impact an end user or a customer, right? And how do you understand these users? You understand them based on like these questions that you ask. That is why setting the stage is very important, because it tells you why you are doing this and who you are doing this for. And then once you understand like the overall prospect or like the overall problem that you're trying to solve, you want to segment, right? You want to segment users or understand different user segments, because not every product is applicable to every person on this planet, for example. And how do you user segment? You user segment based on specific characteristics or traits, right? Demographics, uh, frequency of usage, geographic locations, because that's how certain products work these days because of regulations, etc. And then you identify 2 to 3 user segments. This is like you identifying that segment that you will solve the product design question for. Okay. And then once you've identified these segments, of course, you cannot solve everything for everybody. So one important thing to remember here is you need to prioritize one segment for who you will design the product for, right? And the way you can prioritize is based on a lot of strategic parameters. The most important and the most useful, of course, are reach, whether the customer is an early adopter, whether they are like technology savvy, are they laggards, do they need validations from some other people to kind of adopt it, etc. The impact and scale, because of course, when you design a solution, you want to design it for scale to address the needs of as many customers as possible in that particular segment. And then, of course, the third is what is the context of usage. Once you kind of like go through these things, you can prioritize one user segment for which you will design the product, right? So you list down the user segments and then you talk about for which user segment each of these things kind of makes sense, and then prioritize that and state that segment. Okay, so this is where you now have identified like the end user or the end customer for which you will be designing the product or solving the problem for. But any questions here? The questions? Okay, fine. Once you prioritize the user or the end user, now it's very important to identify their needs, right? This is what we were talking about earlier, identifying the pain points. Because again, a user may have 10 different pain points, but which is the most important pain point for which you will actually create a product, right? And it has to be the most important use case that you address to create the most important value for the market. Ultimately, that's how a product or a service or a process will be successful. So identifying the use cases or pain points, identifying the user needs. Now you list down 2 to 3 based on the user segment that you select. And then out of the 2 to 3, you prioritize one. And the way you can prioritize it or prioritize one pain point is asking about the user's goals, their current situation, how will their pain point usually be addressed, what's like the whole uh, uh, feedback, etc., stuff like that. And that kind of goes into like these things, right? Prioritizing that one segment. And then you have to make some strategic trade-offs and decisions. Once you've listed the users, once you've listed their 2 to 3 pain points, then you prioritize that one pain point and also consider things like whether you'll make revenue out of it, because ultimately a product is commercially successful only if you make money out of it. Is it helping the customers? What's the customer satisfaction? What's the implementation effort? This, of course, is like what would be the amount of work that would go into actually building the product or service or the execution. And then kind of use these 3 categories to come to like one singular focal point of view or one pain point for which you will design the product, right? And to summarize real quick, you identify the user, you check 2 to 3 user segments, you prioritize one user segment. For that user segment, you check 2 to 3 use cases or pain points, and then out of those, you prioritize one pain point, right? This is basically kind of like going top down into a funnel to really be more specific. And again, these are like super important specifics, because if you just prioritize 2 to 3 pain points, or if you just mention, sorry, 2 to 3 pain points and do not prioritize one, you're kind of going off track, because then you're not doing something specific that the interviewer expects, right? So you have to be very specific. And this is one thing I've noticed candidates like really miss out, is like they prioritize the end user correctly. They then mention 2 to 3 use cases and just go off from there. And that is where like you kind of then derail your answer, right? It's important that you're very specific in that aspect of prioritizing that one pain point for which you will design the product. And again, remember, this is a very time constrained space, right? You're under pressure. The interviewer is asking questions. It's a conversation. You maybe have like 25 to 30 minutes to kind of do all of these things. So it's important that the more specific you are, the better it will be, or it is the best way to showcase your skills as a PM for how you will do it in actual practice. But any questions still here before we go to the next slide? Yes, I see a hand.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you come to the podium? Sorry. And please, yeah,
I'll just fill in. Hi, Varun.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I have like two details question. One is when you're setting your user segment, how you're selecting among the top three which one you will work on. That's number one. And number two is like, let's say this you need to design a product in a case competition or in a very short period of time. What are the sources of data you will check, or what the prompt will be if you're even using AI to figure out your user segment, or in any tool from where you can get the actual data to figure your user segment and their pain points and other stuff.
Got it. Absolutely. Good questions. Okay. So let's start with the first one. How do you identify users, or how do you prioritize a user segment, right? This is where your inclination as a product manager or the intuition aspect or the skills come into play, right? When you understand or when you ask these questions, you set the context for understanding what the product is, who is it for, who needs it, etc. That kind of helps you identify the 2 to 3 segments. Now, the way you would prioritize a segment is based on who would find the product the most useful, or where would you create the most impact, right? uh, so when you, let's say, identify 2 to 3 segments, it is better to mention for each segment what would be the reach. Like, for example, let's say if it is individuals in the age of 20 to 40, the reach is the maximum because they are the ones who are actually online using the most uh, social media products, for example. That's who you can reach easily through advertisements, etc., stuff like that. That's how you would mention. If it's another user segment which is, let's say, above the age of 50, then it's a little difficult to reach out to them. The reach is a little low because, of course, they're not that tech savvy. They're not up to date with like the new things. They are a little slow to adopt new tech, etc., stuff like that, right? So that's how you would consider one dimension. The second dimension is the impact, and third dimension is the context. So you would use different dimensions and map it out against each user segment. We'll go to more specifics for the sample, and then you would prioritize that one segment. Okay. Now, this does not need any data. This is actually your strategic mindset. This is actually your product sense. That's why they call this sometimes product sense as well, right? This is our design thinking. This is where your sense or intuition as a product manager would come into play for you to explain this strategically. And of course, that comes through a lot of practice as well as research that you've done across different products. And then how do you prioritize the pain point, right? Before you prioritize the pain point, of course, you do need to understand the most important use cases. Now, there is no data. Again, you have to understand this, right? It's a hypothetical case prompt. They are not going to give you any data. You are free to make your assumptions. And the way you can make assumptions about data points is, let's say, for example, for a user segment in the age of 20 to 50, one of their most important use cases is, let's say, using social media products on a day-to-day basis. And then one of the data points for that can be, out of all the social media products, let's say 50% of the population uses Facebook every day. The rest 20% is maybe TikTok, and the rest 30% is like all the other stuff, right? So you can come up with these data points based on your generic assumptions or your strategic evaluation of where you want to go with the design. Again, they're not going to give you any data points. They're not going to give you any prompts. It is basically you interacting with the interviewer and just stating your assumptions or asking them if this is the right assumption. And if it is not the right assumption, they will tell you, hey, don't use this, use the other data point, and they will give it to you. But it is ideal that you kind of go along these things as you mentioned it. And once you identify the top 2 to 3 use cases, then you use again different dimensions and evaluate each use case against these 3 different categories, right? Let's say you pick 2 use cases, you evaluate each use case based on whether it will bring you the maximum revenue, whether it will provide the maximum customer satisfaction, and whether it is easy to implement. And a good example is, let's say, uh, take the example of any user interface, right? Or where you are just modifying certain drop downs on the screen versus actually building an entirely new screen. Which one would, against these 3 categories as a use case, be the most effective? Now, it can be either one. And again, like I said before or in the beginning, there is no right or wrong answer. It is how you explain it, right? Just modifying certain drop downs to solve a particular pain point can be better from a revenue aspect, than actually building an entire new screen, because that would take more resources, more engineering, more user experience design, etc. And you would invest more, but it may not lead to that impact. So evaluating against these three categories, that's important. So it's about, again, how you set it up. No right or wrong answer. It's important that you evaluate based on your sense of what you think the most important use case or pain point is. Did that help answer the question? Is that okay? Okay, awesome. All right, let's go to the next one real quick. So this is again brainstorming solutions. Now you've identified like one user need or one pain point, and now you will brainstorm solutions only for that prioritized pain point. This is again important. Do not design solutions for everything, because that is just not possible. In practice, in an ideal world, maybe yes, but in reality, it is definitely not going to happen. The most you're going to get out of any team is basically one feature for one pain point, and that's about it. And it's going to take a long time for everybody to come together and build it, right? So for that one pain point that you have selected or prioritized, brainstorm at least 2 to 3 solutions. And some things to consider when you're coming up with solutions. One is, of course, be creative, but don't be obscure. Don't design or provide a solution which is like just impossible to implement. Think more from the user's perspective. This is like the whole working backwards aspect. What is the pain point and how do you solve the pain point? So move backwards from there to come to the solution. Think about key attributes, whether it's an app that will solve the pain point, or whether it's just a bunch of screens that will help the user make a payment, or whether it's just a bunch of processes that will help the user reduce costs by using the shortest path method. I don't know, some of these solutions. Like, so think about it from a user's perspective and keep asking why. Like, I mean, everybody has heard about the 5 whys method probably, but like if you keep asking why, it will kind of help you brainstorm more solutions. And ultimately, when you think about it holistically, it is very important to understand that your solution should improve the user experience. Like, how does it actually improve the experience, and how does it make life better for the user? What's the value add for the user? And of course, just a quick thing again, do not propose solutions that already exist. That's a complete no, because it is already there. There's nothing new that you're doing, so wouldn't sit well or wouldn't give you the expected grade or weightage against this particular section, right? Now you've brainstormed 2 to 3 solutions, and I think the example will probably provide more context, but then you prioritize one solution, right? This is where the whole trade-off comes into picture. Again, it is not possible to build all solutions even for that one pain point. You have to pick one solution, and the way you evaluate it is, what's the customer satisfaction for each solution? What's the implementation complexity for each solution? What's the revenue potential for each solution, as well as what is the strategic importance, right? For solving a pain point, let's say taking a person from point A to point B, there may be 3 different solutions, but out of those solutions, which one is the most important and beneficial to the customer, while which also makes the company the maximum amount of money? So you basically use these dimensions and then use like a pros and cons analysis, evaluate the 2 to 3 solutions and pick one. Once you pick that one solution, mention 2 to 3 key features. These features can be anything like, let's say, for example, when I try to buy a product, it will allow me to check it out using a cart process and make the payment. That's like one feature. Or entering credit card details to make the payment. That's like another feature. And mention like 2 to 3 key important features which will actually help the user and which can be scaled while improving the experience. So this is very important as well. And then once you are done with the solutions, once you prioritize the solutions, mention the features, just check in with the interviewer if everything is okay. And by the time, if you've already done all of this, they will definitely say it's okay, and they will summarize everything. And then they will ask you to actually summarize everything. And then you take 10 to 20 seconds, summarize everything, kind of allude to these 3 things, make sure you're cognizant of like the time aspects as well. And then once you summarize, that's it, right? You're done. You probably throughout the whole process will get follow-up questions. The way I was asked a question, for example, for this section, you may get it. it depends on how you clarify. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. There is no data points. It is just how you clarify, how you look at things. And if the clarification has a good reason, or if it is done with the appropriate reasoning, then the interviewer is okay, and then you can proceed. So this is pretty much what you'll do. And then I'll quickly walk through like a sample case to provide more context. But any questions still here across the entire proposed framework or guidelines or the different aspects to consider? Yes.
Can he hear me or should I?
Yes. No, I can. You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just had a question. So now when you're evaluating solutions, let's say we have two solutions and we are considering whatever you have on screen, the customer satisfaction, the implementation complexity, and so on. We score each of these solutions in a certain, let's say out of 5 we're scoring them. Now, does customer satisfaction always take precedence over revenue potential, or how do we understand? Let's say two solutions and the points are kind of almost similar. What do we do?
Oh, no, good question. That's a good catch. I think I forgot to mention that. So no, none of these categories take precedence. What takes precedence is what is the score across all of these dimensions combined together. So you're right. So let's say you score all of these on a scale of 1 to 5. Customer satisfaction, maybe it's like 4. Implementation complexity is maybe 3. Revenue potential is maybe 5. Strategic importance is maybe, let's say, 5. Then basically the way you would evaluate it is across all these dimensions, and whichever has like the better score, that's the better solution. And one important thing to remember, do not add implementation complexity to your score. You actually need to divide your score by the implementation complexity, right? Because the higher the complexity, the lower is your actual value or the actual output that you get, right? The lower the implementation complexity, the higher is your output. So I think a good way to explain this is, let's say customer satisfaction is 5 points, implementation complexity is 5 points, revenue potential is 5, and strategic importance is 5. Then 5 into 5 into 5 upon 5. That's how you will like kind of come up with a score. And again, there's multiple techniques to do this. One of the most popular techniques is RICE, so reach, impact, confidence, and effort. There's other techniques for feature prioritization or solution prioritization like WSJF, so which is weighted shortest job first. So instead of evaluating it across one dimension and which takes precedence, it is important to evaluate it across all dimensions and get the total score. And then whichever has the higher score kind of goes out first. Because ideally in practice, honestly, it is better to do like a feature which will get done in 2 weeks instead of doing a feature which will take 2 months to provide a solution, right? Because you want to provide immediate impact or immediate service to your customers, kind of keep them happy also along the way, and keep them engaged to kind of drive that adoption. But the quicker you can get something out, the better it is. It's always the case. No exceptions, I think, unless something is completely broken. But does that answer your question, Amulya?
Yeah, definitely. And if you can drop that formula that you were talking about in your deck when you send it over, that would be great.
I will definitely do that. I think that's
awesome.
A way to do it. I will drop it into the deck. Yeah, let me just drop it into the deck. I'll do that.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. All right. Okay. I think there's one more question. Yeah.
We have one more question.
Go ahead.
So, Varun, you mentioned that it's not really good to give an existing solution, like come up with a unique one. But what if the problem actually has an existing solution that works really well? So what do you do in that case?
Okay. So let me rephrase. What I mean is, don't provide an existing solution which is already in practice by that organization, right? Or for the product. If there is an existing solution, then you have to kind of put your own spin on it and kind of be a little creative, because again, they are more looking at how you would think in any given situation and how creative you would be, right? So it's like, it's okay if there is an existing solution, don't just use it exactly as is. You still need to configure and modify it and kind of put your spin on it.
But yeah, if you see some other company already implementing it, you can obviously take an idea from that.
That is, yeah, that's a no. Okay. So that's the big catch, right? If you're just going to copy your competitors, you're not innovating, you're not inventing.
Okay.
And that's the drawback that they will see in the interview. Because it's easy, right? Like I can just copy something from a marketplace, like let's say Amazon, and just build my own marketplace. But what are you doing that is actually providing value to the customers? Why would somebody then come to you? They would just go to them, right? Uh, and you're not innovating them, right? That's how they will catch you. So yeah, if there is an existing solution in the market, like I said, don't just copy it one-on-one. You can always mention that your competitor uses this, but hey, here's my spin on top of it to make it better. Ultimately, you're trying to prove your skills as a PM for how you would make things better, right? Because if let's say somebody else is already doing it, why do we need you then? We can just copy their stuff and get it done. Like, what's your impact, or what value would you create in that role then? So yes, if there's an existing solution, feel free to use it, put your spin on top of it, don't just copy it one-on-one.
Thanks, Varun.
No problem, thank you. All right, one more question.
Yeah, if we have like the two approaches for the solution, and one solution is taking too much time, but it's a real reliable for the in future in terms of technology and in terms of the human forces. So what we can do, we have to go with the short term solution, and after that preparing for the the parallelly for the second solution, or then after migrating or kind of stuff.
Oh yes, so the recommendation is always to kind of go for the short-term solution, because that's what will provide immediate value to the user, right? They're not patient. Think about it, right? Customers don't want to like wait for anything. You can explain that some changes will help them long term, some changes will actually kind of provide more value to them in the long term. But what you can do and put into practice, actually, that is important, and that is where kind of like the feature prioritization matrix comes into play. And let me do this, right? I think this will probably help address some of these questions. Let's see. Okay, so think about this. I don't know if you can see this, but this will pop up in a bit. Okay, let's see. Okay, so RICE, right? This is something called as reach, impact, effort. Okay, the way you would quantify or reach, impact, say confidence, and the formula is simple, right? What you would like to do is just pick a solution or pick a feature where this into this into this divided by this is the maximum, right? And the way this will be maximum is where your effort is the lowest, right? If your effort is the lowest, that means you are going to take, let's say, 2 weeks to do this, then 2 can be the effort, and then if naturally the score will be higher. And you can measure it against any specific number categories. Usually companies define it. For example, the best or the most common trend is to use a scale of, let's say, 1 to 5. There is sometimes the Fibonacci sequence that is used, and it is nothing. It's as simple as, let's say, your reach is 5, your impact is 5, your confidence is 5. Oh, I think this is better. And let's say your effort is maybe, let's say, 1, right? Then this will give you a score of 125. If your effort is, let's say, 5, this will give you a score of 25. Then you go for the feature or solution which has a score of 125. That's how this would kind of work in practice. I understand that sometimes technology upgrades and backend changes and migrations, these things are very important, but customers don't see it, right? At the end of the day, they care about what they see. Like if you make a platform upgrade, let's say you move from some legacy solution to AWS, common example of what has happened with me at work. They don't care what you do in the background, right? They only care about what they see and what they use and what gives them value. So that's like your sense and like this scoring or prioritization that comes into perspective. There are exceptions. I'm not saying don't do it. Like for example, naturally, if let's say you are trying to create Excel reports out of a particular user experience or screen, or you're trying to export Excel reports, for example, out of like a particular screen, and it is taking you 10 hours, then naturally you need to focus on doing those platform upgrades and getting that capabilities uh, up to speed to reduce time to export or time of export and kind of make it more efficient for the users. So it's a case by case situation. Mostly it will always result in something that has a higher score based on what is the feature prioritization process, right? Uh, so it's what you deliver for the customers that's important. One very important thing to remember at the end of the day, as a PM, and I mean we're kind of digressing from like the case interview aspect, but this is also important to note. If in the event you mention it in a case interview, that's great as well. You're not the ones who are executing or building the product. It's engineering. So if engineering is going to come and say we cannot do this, then it's not going to happen, right? And it's your job to convince them and tell them this is the impact and this is the customer expectation, etc. And then user design, UX research, all of them also have to agree and kind of come to that conclusion. So it's always a very dynamic thing. But for the purposes of case interview, you can either use these dimensions and literally use low, medium, high, and the combination which is like gives the maximum value is good. You can use a scale of 1 to 5. You can literally use rice and a scale of 1 to 5 to evaluate the solutions. What's most important in an interview is they don't care about which feature will be the best. They actually care about how you evaluate solutions or features and prioritize one solution and then list the features for it. That's the most important thing. What is your thought process or what structure you use to prioritize a solution? That's most important. So it doesn't matter if it's a backend upgrade or if it's a front end thing. How do you prioritize and how do you clarify this in the interview? That's the most important thing. I hope that I talked a lot, but I hope that answers your question.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. All right. It's in the deck, Amulya, so probably we can just use this. I'll make it cleaner. But okay, all right. So let's do a sample walkthrough. In the interest of time, and here's a case prompt that I had received. Very interesting, right? This is from an actual case interview. It's design a product for space travel, and that's it, right? That's it. That's the prompt that was given, and they stopped. There was only one additional thing that I was told. Assume there are no constraints, and of course, it's a hypothetical example. Nobody's going to suddenly come and ask you to do something for space travel, right? But now think about this. You're in a case interview. This is the problem you're given, and now you have to solve for this problem. Now, what we're going to use is the guidelines I walked through earlier to solve this. It should be pretty quick. But yeah, this is an actual problem. You'll get similar problems like this, and this is how you would proceed. One is clarify the situation, right? So the way I approached this was, what's the context of the product, right? Is this only for space travel, or is it necessary for some other travel, let's say domestic travel, etc.? Kind of set the scene. Only for space travel. Is there a specific need? Why do people need this, right? People want to experience space travel, right? Who doesn't want to experience space travel? Who doesn't want to go to space? That's like what the interviewer said. I was like, okay, that's a cool thing. Why not? I would like to do that. Then is this a new product? And of course, they said it's a new product. That means you have to kind of design it from 0 to 1. I did ask, how will a customer use this product? And it was pretty open in that situation. They said, depends on how you want to design it. I said, can it be an app? And they said, sure, it can be an app. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to build a rocket to send somebody in space, because ultimately that's not what the expectation, right? Think about it. This is where your sense and intuition would come into play. The reason I asked the question, is it an app? Because I wanted to completely eliminate the aspect of any hardware components, any processes which involves physically transporting people into space, etc. Because at the end of the day, it is easier to design an app than design the actual thing, right? Think about it. That's like where your practice will also come into play. One other question I did ask, is this for a global market? Because not every country would allow like these apps or would have these features. And this is based on the demographics, globalization, all those things. And they said you don't need to consider, but always a good thing to check. And here's what I understood, right? New product for space travel. People want to engage or understand or experience space travel. It is an app, will not focus on hardware products. I'm not going to consider any market strategies. That's a go-to-market thing. Doesn't really matter in an interview as long as you get it clarified. But this is like how I set up my context, right? This is like how I set up the stage for me to answer the next questions. And then recognizing the users, right? Now, this is when I identified the users. It's very simple, right? There's either big corporate organizations who can actually afford it and support space travel, right? either through an app or through people experiencing it. And then there's your regular people, right? People who want to experience travel. There's people like astronauts, cosmonauts, people, and the larger subset is people, let's say like me, who cannot physically travel, right? That's not a possibility, but I still want to experience it. And the way I addressed it was, I said, okay, this is interesting. I'm not going to consider corporate organizations. I'm not going to consider astronauts or cosmonauts. I want to focus on someone like me who cannot physically go to space, because that's the largest group, right? That's basically all of the other customers who exist or end users who exist, who want to experience space travel but cannot physically go there for whatever reason that may be. And this is the intuition piece that comes into play. Of course, you need a lot of practice. Things will work, will not work initially, but this is you kind of like how you address it. And then I just created some segments, right? People who cannot travel. They may be anybody like scientists, researchers who want to research stuff, understand how things work. It is somebody like a hobbyist, like somebody like me, like I'm enthusiastic about space travel, what lies out there. And somebody who's like, who's not really interested, and they'll be like, okay, like if it is there, right? I'll experience it. And now I've identified my user segments, right? Basically, I drilled down from like a top-down funnel perspective to like very specific 3 user segments. And then here's how I prioritize the user segment. Considered 2 dimensions: serviceable market and impact. Of course, if you look at these 3 user segments, the people who will be the most interested in this app or service or the experience are people who actually care about it, right? Hobbyists or professionals, right? That's the impact. Then if you think about serviceable market, this is nothing but the total number of users or customers. Of course, the number of hobbyists usually are going to be more than scientists or researchers, right? It's again, and then you have to clarify why. Now, this is the data point thing, right? You were asking about what's the data point to understand why hobbyists will be a higher serviceable market than professionals like scientists. And you can just state, given the age group, given the demographics, only researchers who are actually interested in space or like comets or planets or whatever would want to experience that, not the other researchers. But if it's a hobbyist, people who are just interested in checking out things, or given the age groups, the number will inherently be more. So that's the justification I provided, and the interviewer was okay with it. Again, no specific data points needed. It's just how you clarify things. And then I prioritize the user segment as hobbyists, right? And then once you prioritize a segment, you need to understand their needs or pain points. I like to call them use cases. This nomenclature is different. And then I said, okay, there's 3 things, right? And if you look at it holistically, you may have different answers, right? Like, again, there is no right or wrong answer to this. You can totally pick professionals. That's okay, as long as you justify correctly why you are prioritizing professionals, what dimensions you're using. That's it. That's all they care about. It doesn't matter. You don't have to pick hobbyists. You don't even have to pick people. You can even pick corporates. That's okay. It's just how you prioritize it against different dimensions that's important. But here's how I did it. So I picked hobbyists, and for these people, I put down like 3 pain points, right? 1, I want to experience space travel in a realistic way, right? If you look at images and just check out something online, it's a limited experience. There's no easy way to talk to people in space. Think about somebody in the International Space Station, maybe some astronaut. I have many questions. What if somebody wants to live on a different planet completely? That's okay as well. Somebody may want to do that. That's the experience they want. So these are like the 3 important use cases I selected, and then I prioritized one user need or pain point, right? And the dimensions I used were, again, reach and impact, right? Because you want to reach the maximum number of people and you want to create the maximum impact. You can choose different dimensions like revenue or customer satisfaction. That is okay. But do explain why you picked the dimensions. My reasoning was simple: reach the maximum number of people, make the maximum impact. So pretty straightforward. And then, excuse me. And then this is the evaluation for prioritizing the pain point, right? The first one, limited way to experience safe space travel. I said the reach is high because that's the largest user group. Everybody wants to experience it. Impact is high because if you design a service for them, they are going to adopt it very quickly. Talk to an astronaut, reach is low. Not everybody will have the permission to speak to an astronaut. So naturally, that user base is inherently smaller. Impact is high. I mean, if you can talk to somebody, the experience will be great. But think about it, right? Not everybody will have the permission or will be given the ability to speak to an astronaut. And living on another planet, I mean, that's just a little difficult, right? The reach is low. Impact is maybe medium. You never know if there's a space mission that's sent out. And if you look at this, the reach equals high, impact equals high for this particular pain point. So I just picked this one. And that was my reasoning behind it, right? This is how I kind of drilled down and got towards one specific pain point for which I wanted to design the product. And then brainstorming solutions, right? Uh, how do you design solutions for somebody to experience space travel in a limited way? And this goes back to the earlier question, right? There's AR, VR technology available. A lot of like uh, companies or tech companies sell these headsets, etc. What I said was you construct 3D worlds based on real life photos and images, but use AR, VR and kind of give that experience. So I would feel like I'm sitting in space or I'm sitting on or living on another planet. There is another solution to experience space travel, live stream, right? Like, but this is like real live feed from the astronauts. And again, this is something which is not done in the market. There are things like live stream, but how do you kind of put your twist on it, right? Live feed, but from astronauts. Then space experience centers. These are like your entertainment centers where you can actually use AR, VR and kind of hang out with other people with the same hobbies, etc. Stuff like that. So these are the three solutions that were listed. And then I prioritize the solution, right? And the way I did it was time to market and impact again. I did not use a numeric scale, completely okay, because the context here was why even use a numeric scale, right? There's not a lot of products which actually help anybody experience space travel. So the qualitative aspect was okay in that case. And then again, evaluating the three solutions against different dimensions. Time to market, impact, time to market, impact, time to market, impact. And then if you look at this, my reasoning was there is already technology available where you can put headsets and use AR, VR. All you would need to do is kind of construct those 3D worlds, kind of construct those models or use AI to generate those images or videos, etc. Mesh them together, kind of come up with the flow and build like solutions within that AR, VR world. Uh, Time to market is low because there's a lot of things which are already available from a technology standpoint, and impact is high because it is easier to scale across a larger user base, right? I don't need to build the same thing for different people. I can just build it once, integrate it across, let's say, different products like Meta's Quest headsets, Apple Vision Pro, Snapchat's glasses, whatever it is. Like you can still build the same standardized experience across multiple areas, devices from different tech companies. That was my reasoning for why the impact is high. And since a lot of people specifically use these products, let's say Snapchat or Facebook or whatever, like the Apple ecosystem, it's easier to kind of uh, con- convince them to experience this or adopt this. That was the reasoning, and that led to me saying time to market is low, impact is high, and that's why I would prioritize this, right? So that's the reason I prioritize this solution. And once the solution was prioritized, it's just some features. This is not mandatory to call out. It's a good to have thing, kind of helps you differentiate your answer in the interview. I just said one feature can be experiencing different planets. Maybe I want to check out Jupiter, I want to check out Pluto, I don't know. Kind of experiencing those ecosystems and environments. Uh, One of them is taking photos of the experience and posting it on social media so I can share it with like a broader audience. And third is, of course, sharing that virtual experience with my friends, right? All of us maybe wear headsets and then are kind of in the same room or on the same planet and kind of uh, take that into consideration. So these were the key features. And again, you can come up with any features you want. It's just explaining the features and why you selected those features. That's important. And then summarizing. And then it was just basically summarizing all of these things together. Uh, in like a 20 to 30-second response, and that's it. And that's the way I designed the product for space travel. Basically, it would be an app which would allow hobbyists to experience 3D worlds constructed from AR, real life photos and images, basically with AR, VR headsets, for them to experience space travel because they cannot physically actually do that immediately. So that's how the way the question was answered, or how like the answers was supposed to be. Worked out pretty well, but that's the way it was. And then summarize. Once you summarize, you're done. If there's any follow-up questions, of course the interviewer will ask you that. But given it's just 30 minutes, very low chances of a lot of follow-up questions. They'll have very specific questions. But again, just a quick sample walkthrough of how like an actual case interview prompt would look like, and what are the guidelines. Again, this, you don't have to follow them word by word. Just kind of stick to a structure and give good explanations or clarifications for the structure and why you're prioritizing, or why you're selecting, why would actually work like in practice. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's it from my side. And then there's some sample case prompts I have for anybody who wants to take a cut at this and kind of work through cases. Again, these are actual prompts from actual interviews. Uh, Something which I found interesting, designing a product for gardening, pretty uh, interesting, and pretty, different from like the usual services or processes you were concerned about. Then design a social media product for travel. Again, interesting, social media, but for travel. And one of the most important, or like one of the funny prompts was that I had received, was improving features of a Maps app, right? And there was no specification for which app, but just improve like a Maps app. And then you kind of set the context to understand which app, or you pick an app and then kind of improve it. So for the audience here, if anybody wants to like do these case prompts, this is like a good way to practice. Of course, you can do more of these, but this is pretty much, I think, very interesting, and what would happen in like actual case interviews. But yeah, that's it from my side. Happy to take any questions. Happy to answer anything, and I'll let Niti or Amulya or anybody, the organizers, decide how to proceed next.
Someone has a question.
Yeah, someone has a question. In waiting, yes. I share, yeah. Okay. Ask a question.
Hi, Varun, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Well, thank you for this session. It was really, really insightful. I mean, everybody here wanted to know about case studies and how to proceed with them. So thanks a lot for this. So my question was, I was recently going through case studies to, practice in general. And so one thing that came across, so this product, this sample case study that you showed us right now was a very novel concept. But what if there's a case study wherein probably Amazon wants to come up with an app which is similar to Uber, wherein something like that already exists, but Amazon wants to venture into such kind of a feature. So can you give us some prompts as to how do we go about this kind of a case study?
Yeah, absolutely. No, good question. I think it's a very good question, right? That's the whole design of, basically the way they would ask is, let's say you're the PM for Amazon, design a product for us to start a ride sharing service. That's how they would give the prompt. So ultimately, it doesn't matter the way you have to think about it. Is it is still designing a product, right? It's still the product design question, right? Nothing changes, right? I mean, it's Amazon. The only good thing that will happen is you can kind of, in the solutions, say we already have such a large customer base, we already have an app, then maybe within the app we give the option to book rides also, or partner with Uber to book rides also, right? That kind of come into the solutions aspect. But overall, you would still proceed as if it was just a plain design a product question or improve a product question. So nothing actually changes in that aspect. The only
Right,
good
but
thing is you can
you
kind of
also,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. So
No,
you
go ahead.
also said that you can go and give a spin-off to a traditional solution that already exists. So in your opinion, what do you think could be a spin-off for this? Like, do you think we can give a different USP to this product so that it stands out from Uber in any way? Like anything
Oh
that
yeah,
comes to your mind
absolutely.
immediately.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So USP is important. Think about it. The one thing that immediately comes to my mind is Amazon has a lot of vans which deliver packages, right? Why not just use them for ride sharing? They're anyways going from houses to houses, different zip codes to zip codes. Why can't you optimize or configure them to just drop people, kind of convert the van into something else and drop the package as well as drop the people, do two things at once, and make money at the same
Right.
time. So kind of that's how like I would put my spin off on it. And again, this is like uh, uh, how much you practice and how you think or how you would justify it. My justification would be there's already an existing system in place. My spin-off or my configuration on top of it is just use their existing delivery vans to also transport people from one place to another place because they've already optimized the routes. That's like one of the things they can do. They already have like a large user base where they have saved people's addresses, etc. And they can kind of just use that to build that experience. So that's how I would put it. And this is just me taking maybe 5 seconds to think about it. But I'm
Right.
sure there's like multiple things you can do, right? Like the more you think, the more you brainstorm, uh, better solution you will come up with. So
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
no problem.
Do we have any questions? Anyone?
No one has questions. I just have few things I want to say.
Sure.
There's, I think somebody raised their hand, Amulya. I think
Yeah, someone raised.
that's fine.
Oh, oh
You're able to hear me? So,
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
so recently there was this was just an interview experience. So I was stuck at that time, and even I was thinking like where we could get this. So since you're here talking about the real time experience, I thought maybe let's just put in the case and see what you have to say about it. So
Yeah.
Peter explained about his retail market, and he gave a case scenario, but he has like just 5 to 6 minutes to. He was expecting a straight response, so he just gave the scenario, and it's like his feature didn't go as planned, and he want his product manager to convince the vice president of product and the director of the product to say like, hey, this is not going, and what do you kind of expect me to convince? I mean, as a PM or leading, since you are leading the team, how could you convince your team immediately that how you could reprioritize the things within 2 weeks? Either you are taking help from additional work, or maybe you are resizing your feature. How you could deal with this situation? This was the scene I was put in, and he just gave me like a couple of minutes. That's it.
Mhm.
And
Go ahead.
when I said the answer, like he was not convinced. So I was wondering how you would deal with this situation. I just wanted to take insights.
Oh no, absolutely. I think good question. I do want to quickly point out you will not get that in a product design case interview, right? It's a very different type of. This is another type of interview. This is like your situational awareness or your uh, how do you work as a leader kind of like interviews, right? Or more of along the behavioral lines. Good question. Uh, so here's a way I would address it, and I think I just wanted to quickly call out, right? I'm sharing my screen here before I answer your question, and when you said they immediately expected a response, it is okay to take like 1 minute, not actually 1 minute, maybe 30 to 45 seconds within or between each section, like between each section, to kind of note down your thought processes and framework, right? Standard case interview practice, nothing new here, but always good to kind of structure your thoughts before you immediately start speaking. I think I did miss out on this initially. Uh, Using pen or paper or like Microsoft Word works best. I personally prefer pen and paper. It's just quicker that way to kind of note down points. So that's okay as well. Yes, and to your question, I mean, see again here, there's no right or wrong answer to this. So depends on what they wanted to hear. The my takeaway or my way to address this would be one, you get a little more clarification on like what is the exact expectation. Second, you do tell the interviewer, for example, like a very specific or defined action plan, let's say maybe 3 to 4 steps for how you would address it, and then you would kind of like describe the result or impact, your star format kind of, but configured in a little different way. And what you should cover is basically, let's say you want to immediately react to a situation, you cannot immediately react to a situation. It's mostly you will try and understand some data points or do some analysis, but you cannot always be stuck in the analysis paralysis conundrum. You have to have that bias for action, right? You have to move quickly. And then you would kind of describe that you would take a calculated risk, weighing certain pros and cons of the situation. And how do you weigh pros and cons, right? You want to weigh pros and cons across different dimensions like impact, customer experience, etc. And then third is you would kind of define a solution for how you would proceed. One would be like set up stakeholder meetings, get everybody together. Second is in that meeting, probably provide a root cause analysis document with your data points. And third is like explain like the risk outcome and risk mitigation strategies. And then fourth is like kind of you execute it into practice while also setting the expectations for customer communications, escalations, and all that stuff, while keeping your supervisor or whoever it is, including the leadership in loop. At least that's how I would address it. Uh, it's important to note again, I think it's a little difficult to exactly pinpoint what's the correct answer. In my experience, and this is pretty much how it is, again, there's no specific right answer. It's how you bring your experience into the interview and how do you actually structure your answer, right? You have to be very specific. Don't, of course, go on for 4 or 5 minutes, but be very concise and kind of just be very specific on what actions you would take and what impact that would create. I think that's the way probably how I would answer it. But did that help? Does that kind of answer like your concerns? If it didn't, then let me know. I can take a quick minute to think
No,
about something.
no, it was the same solution that I designed when I was selecting, right? We wanted to deploy the feature with initial pain point that was at first. I mean, I structurized in it like, hey, let's deploy the initial version because obviously we'll be deploying other updates within next releases that we are planning. So let's prioritize the first pain point that whatever we figured out within the immediate release within, which is solving the major impact that we planned for, and then kind of release the upgrade versions later. But this was summarizing the solution how I want to prioritize it.
So yeah, one of the things is, and like one important thing to know, realize is, right, sometimes deploying immediately is not the right answer. That's why I said the first point is to kind of collect more data, right? Do that customer validation or at least run those experiments or do some testing to understand what is going wrong and where it is going wrong, and kind of then build on top of that. What you did is correct, but I would take like one extra step before it to understand some data, speak with engineering, speak with like, let's say, the technical field teams that are out there to kind of get better insights. I think that's probably what they want to hear. Like instead of directly jumping into it, would you think about it once, or would you come up with a strategy to address it? And then you're right? Like deploying it, getting more data, then iterating and doing subsequent releases, that is correct. But if I look at like the solution, I would just do that one pre-step of analyzing or reviewing metrics or KPIs of some sort, if that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have another question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Varun. Thank you for the session. So basically, I have this question. Do we have to include this component of collecting user feedback after we've prioritized a solution? I mean, because while during the product development process, since we are building this product to the users, I mean, how do we ensure that users themselves are, will be the product will be tailored to the user segment which we have narrowed it down to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two ways to do this, right? Like, okay, thinking about it from a case interview perspective, you do not have to say you will collect user feedback. They're not really concerned with it. They're mostly concerned with how you come up with a solution and design a solution. After you design a solution, or after you prioritize one solution and list the features, then maybe you can state that, hey, I'll collect feedback by surveys or forms, or like just reaching out to the end users directly, or whatever it is, right? That's one way to address it in the interview. Not mandatory to include in any of the steps. Completely okay. If you do, if you get the time and you include it at the end, it's a bonus point. but I do not think it usually comes to that situation where there's so much time left to talk about customer feedback. A second, in actual practice, it goes either ways. Before building something new, it is always better to kind of validate the concept and understand before you put resources or investment towards like implementing it or executing it. So getting customer feedback is beforehand or before you start building something is the best way. Usually, I think, and the most effective way is either as a PM, you do your research, reach out to customers, or partner with the UX research team. Right? They are like your the best resource you have to kind of understand what goes on from like a day-to-day end users actions perspective. And then of course, once you launch the feature or whatever it is, you would still collect feedback because then you want to measure whether it is successful, whether it is being adopted or not. So two different scenarios, two different ways to address it.
Thank you, Varun.
Anyone else? Any questions? Amulya, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a few things. So, on my interview, I had an interview for my full-time position, and then they gave a case study as well to me. And it's not exactly like a mobile application that you would actually evaluate the way he said. I mean, it's a little different, but the thinking process still remains the same. So I just wanted to highlight the few mistakes that I did so that you guys don't do that. So the case study was basically saying, how would we overtake slow-moving vehicles? Because now I'm working in a trucking company. How would we exactly do that? We don't have to think about the entire thing as of now. Let's just focus on the mistakes that I did. So the first thing is I kind of panicked because it's a little difficult to set. Everything comes into your mind, right? You'll have like so many points that comes into your mind, and you're thinking almost all the solutions that you have. So don't go till that. The structure, what Varun mentioned, is one of the most important. Have a structure in your answer, because the sample case that he has given is an excellent way to actually go about it and use that as a template for any case study you get. So I didn't do that. So you get to know where you lack in an interview, right? So it took me a little bit of time to understand, oh, I'm going everywhere. And when he says, choose an exact problem, choose an exact solution, dig through only that solution that you have and not exactly branch out into everything that's possible. You don't have to show the interviewer in the 30 minutes or whatever you have that you know a lot. You don't have to show that. He chose you because you know a lot, but he wants to understand what is your thinking process when a problem is thrown on the table. And we get, as product managers, we get these kind of problems every day, and you have to really be calm in terms of understanding what kind of solution do you want, because you cannot like randomly say, I have all the money in the world, let me build whatever I want, or you cannot build something that nobody's going to use. So first thing is your structure. I would say take his template. I think it's a great starting point because it's been documented somewhere, and literally write down, choose your application and write down where do you want to start. Structure is extremely important. The second thing was I did not give assumptions. So even though I worked in that company for a year, there is a whole new necessity to give assumptions, because you cannot randomly think that, okay, something was working and that's why I did this feature, but whatever was working, nobody knows what was exactly working. So you're not supposed to exactly say, this is what I assumed. Even if it's existing, say, I assumed this was working and that's why I kind of came into this solution. Assumptions are very important. And the third one is that never focus on how. So I think he mentioned on one of his pages as well, saying that engineer is going to build what you're supposed to do, right? You're a product manager. Focus only on what and why. Because when you go to the how complexity, it's just going to become like you're focusing on everything now. And you don't need it. You don't need to spend that time to go and focus on how. When you say, what do I need? Why do I need? And what customer pain point am I addressing? Then you go back to your engineer and you say, I want this. Can you build it or not? So your engineer will give you a code. He'll say that, no, I can't do this in 6 months. I can't do this in 12 months, or I can do it in just 2 months. So let's add more features on what's there. So you really need to have a very good understanding with your engineering team. But when you're solutioning, because you're panicking and you're in an interview, don't go to solutioning directly and say, I'll just build a feature where everyone's going to go together in a cab. That's stupid, because that's like you're not giving the customer pain point there. You're not addressing what the customer exactly asked you for. So in an interview, the major thing is be really, really calm. I know it's a very difficult ask, but it's needed because you guys need to implement this in your everyday job. And I think that those things were few things that I just noted down so I can tell you guys and don't make the same mistake. Structure is very important. Even now with the sample case study that he has given, don't randomly go through it and think of everything that you can do. Go through it one by one, exactly the same template he gave. What are the questions? I expected all of you as well as the people on the call to ask a lot of questions because I don't know what is the extent you know in product, right? So when you ask more questions, you tend to understand things more better. Even the silliest question kind of makes sense because when I'm interacting with so many people, especially localites, it's a little intimidating for me as well. But when I go there and I ask the silliest of questions, there'll be 4 or 5 people who will raise their hand and say, oh, I have the same question. So don't ever, serious questions is the best question. You need to know everything so that you can exactly build a solution. And at the end of the day, your customer is adopting it and your success metrics depends on what you're kind of building. So do not like screw it up in the first beginning, not understanding. Never hesitate to ask a question. So I kind of expected all of you to ask a lot of questions, which you didn't. Probably you guys hesitated because it's a call or something like that. But when we're working on the sample, I'm not sure what we're going to do after this. I think Adya can brief us up. So when we're working on the sample, let's work together and let's try and figure out what kind of questions can we answer so that we are it's much easier to speak back and forth. And like even for me, as like I got into product because I speak a lot. I know, I speak a lot. But then you have to really structure how you speak as well, because speaking random things and speaking meaningful things have a lot of difference. So I think that is what I wanted to cover. I don't know, Varun, if you disagree with anything, just tell them.
No, this is great. Well said, Amrita. Thank you so much for that.
Awesome.
Vishal, there's a question. She has put a question
Okay.
in the chat.
Okay, so there was a question from one of our registration forms. So sometimes the interviewer doesn't help the candidate to get on interviews decide direction of solution while giving a case interview. And that concludes as a not fit scenario for the candidate. How to get the cues and get on board is the question.
So okay, now I can speak to both aspects as the interviewer and the interviewee, right? You're right. I get your concerns, very valid. But as the interviewer, you have to understand they are actually just testing you, right? If they're not giving you cues, or if they are, let's say, not responsive, then that means they expect you to be a little more verbose or clarify your reasoning a little. And you can always just ask them if you're on the right track or not. If they say, they will not say I don't know, of course they will either say yes or no. If they say yes, great thing, proceed. If they say no, then tell them, okay, I'm going to take 30 more seconds, revise my approach and come back. And that's how you would address it. Now the way you would get cues is by making the interview more interactive, right? Like we discuss like the guidelines and all of these things, etc., stuff like that. After each section, the way I was asking you, do you have any questions? You do the same thing. Ask the interviewer if they are okay with the approach, if they're okay with what you are doing, or if they have any questions. And that's how you type leverage that opportunity to get more cues. If you do not get more cues, that's okay. You still proceed. For you, it's an interview. And you still need to come up with the right solution. And like I said, it's not always necessary that they will be very interactive. That is how sometimes they're expected to be, right? Like I've been in interviews where I've not had a single word said to me except the case prompt. Like that's it. Like, and that is how they're testing your situational awareness for how you would react with external or internal stakeholders or any customers, etc., who would be very opinionated or who would not agree with you immediately, right? I mean, think about it. When you actually go into practice, there is going to be a lot of people there with different opinions. Not everybody is going to agree with you, right? Like how Amulya was saying, engineering may come and say, hey, not 3 months, man, like it's 6 months. Do whatever you want. What do you do then, right? Like that's how they're kind of trying to test you, how you would react in those situations. So I would not worry so much about it. What I would focus more on is asking them number one, after each section, or let's say after each part, asking them if they are following and if they're okay. And number two, just being a little more assertive or just clarifying things a little in detail if they're not interactive. So that's how you would kind of get those cues and address it. I hope that helps.
Anyone has any questions? Okay, so I hope there are no questions. So with that being said, thank you so much, Varun, for your time and being part of this event. It was really a great session. We learned a lot in case study breakout, and it was really insightful. And there were a couple of questions, like someone asked if you could share a deck. So
Yes.
okay, so we will be sharing the deck in a couple of days after Varun finalizes it. And that being said, thank you so much, Varun, for joining this club and being part of this meeting. And it was a really great event. And any final words you have to say for us, or?
No, again, thank you for having me here. This is super great. And thank you everybody for taking time out, especially on a weekend. And Mulya, thank you for the great insights. Super helpful. All good. And no, I did share the deck. So it has all the additional tweaks or changes that were suggested. And of course, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer those. Not a problem. But again, no, good luck with everything. My one uh, key takeaway, or the one last thing I would recommend to anybody, and I get it, it may be okay with someone, not okay with someone. You do need to practice a lot. Like, it is not going to happen overnight. It is not going to happen in 1 week. Building that intuition or sense to actually on the spot come up with clarifications takes time. You need to kind of develop that edge. And I'm sure Amulya or anybody else here, if they can probably refer to it, I'm sure you can attest to it as well. But yes, it will need practice, because you will not be doing just one case interview. It will be multiple case interviews right from the beginning. So you will have to like build that uh, sense from a product perspective for how you would address each situation, right? So that's my last advice. Practice, and practice with each other. Like, you don't have to like do like formal practices maybe, because then somebody can give you feedback immediately on the spot and you can kind of fine tune your skills. Use the product club at UTD. They are a great resource. They have some amazing sessions that were done previously. I'm sure they have some amazing things lined up as well. Definitely take their advice. And no, and absolutely, last thing, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that being said, we are gonna have a 10-minute break, and we're gonna have Amulya come over with a case study. So thank you so much. Thank you for the people who have joined the call. We're gonna have a 10-minute break. And thank you so much, Varun, for the event as well.
No problem. Thanks, y'all. I hope the sample case prompts help. And if anybody needs any feedback, I'm happy to do that offline. Not a problem. And have a great weekend. And I do have a hard stop, so I do have to drop off. But enjoy your weekend otherwise. Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Uh, yeah.
Okay, so what we do now is we